Ever get that feeling like you're just drowning in all this information about like the planet and the future and like everything? Every day there's a new headline about some disaster or another, and every expert has a different take, and it's like, what are you supposed to believe? Like what's
Yeah.
actually important to understand here?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people feel that way these days. It can be overwhelming.
Totally. So you ready to jump into another top secret investigation?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
All right. So on Conspiracy Q today, we are cutting through all that noise. We're going deep on this question, this huge question. Is this whole story we're being told about catastrophic climate change, is that a real crisis or is there something else going on?
Right, right. And today's investigation is going to take us into some recently uncovered or classified sources. And these sources, well, they suggest that what we're being told about the climate could be part of something much bigger, something that was actually, planned. We're talking about a possible huge psychological operation, like maybe the biggest one in history.
Wow. Okay, so where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, the material we've been looking at, it starts by showing us some things that don't quite add up, like details about how we've thought about the planet, how we've perceived its future, and how that's changed over time.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So let's go back in time for a second, back to the
It's the
1970s.
70s. Okay, far out.
Right. Now, this might sound crazy now, but back then, people weren't worried about the planet getting too hot. They were worried about a new ice age.
An ice age. Hold on, are you serious?
Dead serious. Big publications like Time Magazine, Newsweek, they had these cover stories warning about, global cooling, a coming ice age.
Wow. And I thought bell bottoms were wild. So were they just wrong back then? Like, did scientists just have it all backwards?
Well, that's not that simple. The sources we're looking at, they point out how quickly the narrative switched from this global cooling fear to, the global warming one that we're all familiar with. And it happened like within a decade.
That is a pretty fast turnaround. Did they ever explain, like, why they changed their minds?
That's the thing. The sources point out that there wasn't really a clear public explanation for this massive shift. It just kind of happened.
Huh. That's weird. So we went from worrying about freezing to worrying about burning up, and no one really explained why.
Pretty much. And that brings us to the next strange thing. It's about how we measure the planet's temperature today.
How do we do that?
Well, a lot of the temperature readings we use, they come from these weather stations,
Yeah.
right? But the sources point out that a whole bunch of these stations are in cities, at airports, parking lots, places with a lot of concrete and buildings.
Okay, so.
Well, think about it. Those places, they naturally trap more heat. They're what are called urban heat islands.
Oh, okay, I've heard of that. So you're saying the location of these weather stations could be messing with the data.
Exactly.
Mm.
If you're mostly measuring temperature in these artificially hot spots, then the overall picture you get might be skewed. It might look like the planet's warming up faster than it really is.
So it's not necessarily about whether the planet is warming or not, but about how we're measuring it and whether that's accurate, right?
Right. And the sources, they ask whether maybe some of this data could be, cherry-picked to support the idea of, like, super fast warming.
To make it seem scarier than it really is.
Exactly. And this all ties into something even bigger. These long-term climate patterns that the planet has gone through, like way before humans were even around.
You mean like the ice ages?
That's one example, but there's others too. Scientists can look at things like ice core samples. They're like time capsules, showing us what the Earth climate was like thousands of years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. So what did these ice cores tell us?
Well, they show that the Earth's climate has always changed. It's gone through natural cycles of warming and cooling for, a very long time, long before humans started burning fossil fuels.
Okay, I knew about the ice ages, but I didn't realize there were other warming periods too.
Oh, yeah. There's one period in particular that the sources highlight. It's called the medieval warm period, and it happened roughly between, let me see, like 950 and 1250 AD. And there's data that suggests that temperatures back then in certain places were actually as warm as or even warmer than they are today.
And that was before cars and factories and all that.
Right. So the question the sources raise is, if the planet has warmed up naturally before, without us humans doing anything, then what does that mean for the warming we're seeing today? is it really something completely new, or are we just in another natural cycle, maybe one that's being, pushed along a little bit by human activity?
That's a good question. It's like, how much of this warming is our fault and how much is just the planet doing its own thing?
Exactly. And the sources point out that these historical warming periods, they're often kind of glossed over in the mainstream climate narrative.
It's almost like they want us to forget that the planet has been warm before.
That's what the sources seem to be suggesting. They also bring up something else that's pretty fascinating, and that's the people who have questioned the mainstream climate narrative, scientists and experts who have offered different perspectives.
Oh, this is where it gets juicy. Like those whistleblowers we've talked about before?
Yeah, kind of like that. These are people who have, risked their careers and reputations to speak out.
Brave souls.
Okay.
So who are some of these people?
Well, one example that the sources really focus on is this scientist, Dr. Judith Curry. She used to be the head of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at a really prestigious university, Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech, that's a big deal. So what happened to her?
Well, according to these sources, she started raising concerns about how certain some of the climate models were. Like, she was saying that we don't actually know for sure how bad things are going to get, and that there's still a lot of uncertainty.
And that's a bad thing, to point out the uncertainty.
Apparently so. According to the sources, she was labeled a denier, which is, a really loaded term.
Yeah, it's like you're instantly branded as some kind of heretic.
Right. And because of her views, she apparently faced a ton of criticism, lost support in the academic community, and eventually ended up resigning from her position.
Wow. So she basically got pushed out for not towing the line.
That's what the sources suggest. And she's not alone. The sources also talk about scientists who resign from the IPCC.
The IPCC, remind me what that is again.
It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're like the big international body that's supposed to be the authority on climate science.
Right, right. So why did these scientists resign from the IPCC?
Well, the sources say that they were worried about political bias, that the IPCC's reports were being influenced by political agendas. And they were also concerned that some of the findings were being tweaked, made to sound more alarming than they actually were.
So they felt like the science was being manipulated to fit a narrative.
Exactly. And this brings us to another big story that the sources really dive into. It's something that happened back in 2009. Remember ClimateGate?
ClimateGate, yeah, vaguely. Refresh my memory.
It was this huge scandal involving leaked emails from some top climate scientists at a university in the UK. The sources point out that this whole thing didn't get nearly enough attention in the mainstream media, given what was in those emails.
What was in them?
Well, according to the sources, the emails showed scientists talking about, manipulating data to hide a decline in temperatures.
Hide the decline. That sounds familiar.
Right. It was this big thing. The emails also showed them talking about, suppressing dissenting opinions and trying to pressure other scientists to support the warming narrative.
Wow. So basically trying to control the whole conversation.
That's what the sources are suggesting. And the thing is, even though this was a major scandal, there weren't any big investigations or anything. No one was really held accountable.
It's almost like the whole thing got swept under the rug.
Yeah, and that just adds to the suspicion that maybe there's a deliberate effort to, keep certain information about climate change out of the public eye.
Okay, so we've got scientists being silenced, data maybe being manipulated, and a whole lot of questions about the narrative we're being fed. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet. The money.
Right. Who's actually profiting from all of this? That's what the sources really want us to think about.
Oh, the money, right?
Exactly. So they point to this whole carbon market that's sprung up. It's where people buy and sell carbon credits. And it's a huge industry now, worth trillions of dollars.
Okay, so remind me how carbon credits work again.
It's basically like this. Companies, and even countries, they can buy these credits to offset their carbon emissions.
Yeah.
So if they're polluting a lot, they can buy credits from someone else who's polluting less.
And this is supposed to help reduce emissions overall.
That's the idea. But the sources point out that this whole system has created a huge financial incentive for people to, push the climate crisis narrative.
Because the more we believe that climate change is a dire threat, the more valuable these carbon credits become.
Right. It's like, who's really benefiting from carbon becoming this, new global currency? The sources highlight that tons of corporations, banks, even celebrities, they're all involved in this carbon trading game.
It's almost like climate change has become this big business opportunity.
And that's not all. The sources also talk about green energy lobbying.
What's that?
Well, you know how there are all these billionaires and big companies that are super vocal about climate action. donating to environmental groups, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's jumping on the green bandwagon these days.
Right. But the sources point out that a lot of these same people and companies are also investing heavily in green energy technologies like wind and solar power, electric vehicles, that kind of thing.
Okay, so they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Kind of. But here's the thing. These green energy sectors, they often get huge government subsidies and tax breaks.
So they're making money both ways. They get to look like they're saving the planet, and they get financial benefits from it too.
Exactly. And the sources ask, is all this push for green energy really just about the environment, or is it also about making a whole lot of money?
Right. It makes you wonder if the solutions they're pushing are actually the best ones, or if they're just the ones that make them the most money.
It's a valid question. And there's one more thing about the financial side of things that the sources bring up. They call it the climate tax pipeline.
The climate tax pipeline. Okay, I'm listening.
This is about the potential for governments to use the climate crisis as an excuse to, raise taxes and introduce all sorts of new regulation.
I can see that happening. Like, carbon taxes have already been talked about, right?
Right. And the sources say that this could just be the beginning. They talk about possible taxes on air travel, meat consumption, all sorts of things.
And they mentioned personal carbon trackers, right? Like devices that monitor how much carbon each person is using.
Yeah. The sources suggest that this whole climate thing could be used to justify a huge increase in surveillance and control over our lives.
Wow. So it's not just about saving the planet, it's about controlling people, too.
That's the concern the sources raise. They talk about this idea of eco-authoritarianism.
Eco-authoritarianism, so like a green dictatorship.
Kind of. It's this idea that the climate crisis could be used to justify a much more controlling, authoritarian form of government.
And they use the lockdowns from a couple of years ago as an example, right?
Right. Remember how emissions went down during the lockdowns because everyone was staying home? Well, the sources say that some people use that as proof that we need to take drastic measures to fight climate change, even if those measures restrict our freedoms.
It's like they're saying, look, we can control your lives, and it's for the good of the planet.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. And they also bring up how kids are being taught about climate change.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other thing.
The sources suggest that a lot of schools are really focusing on the worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
Making it sound like the planet's doomed unless we do something drastic.
Which probably freaks a lot of kids out. I know I'd be scared if I was a kid hearing that stuff all the time.
Right. And the sources point out that there's been a rise in climate anxiety among young people. They ask, is this constant bombardment of doom and gloom actually a deliberate tactic to, manipulate the next generation into accepting certain solutions?
It's like they're trying to program them from a young age.
That's what the sources seem to be suggesting. And this whole thing, it goes even beyond individual countries. They talk about global organizations that are pushing the climate agenda.
Like the UN.
The UN is one, but they also talk about this organization called the World Economic Forum, or the WEF. They're the ones behind this Great Reset idea.
The Great Reset, that's the one with the creepy slogan, right? You'll own nothing and be happy.
That's the one. The sources suggest that the WEF is using climate change as a justification for the Great Reset, for this major overhaul of the global economy and society.
So they want to use the climate crisis to completely reshape the world.
That's what the sources are suggesting. They make it sound like this whole climate thing could be a way to usher in a whole new world order.
A world where we don't even own anything.
That's the idea, at least according to some interpretations of the Great Reset. And then there's the UN's Agenda 2030.
Agenda 2030. I've heard that term before. What is it exactly?
It's this plan from the UN that lays out these ambitious goals for sustainable development by the year 2030. Things like ending poverty, improving healthcare, protecting the environment.
Okay, those all sound like good things. So what's the problem?
Well, the sources focus on the parts of Agenda 2030 that deal with climate action. They point out that some of these goals could lead to things like, increased surveillance, people being forced to live in more densely packed urban areas, and even attempts to control people's behavior.
So in the name of saving the planet, they could end up taking away a lot of our freedoms.
That's the worry. The sources suggest that Agenda 2030 could be a blueprint for a kind of global governance, where the UN and other international organizations have a lot more power over our lives.
And they'd be able to justify it all in the name of saving the planet.
Exactly. So we've seen how the sources suggest that the mainstream narrative about climate change could be misleading, that there are financial incentives to keep that narrative going, and that it could even be used to justify more control over our lives.
Okay, but what about the actual science? Like, is there any evidence that CO2 isn't really the big bad guy it's made out to be?
Well, that's another thing the sources talk about. They present this idea that CO2 isn't actually a pollutant.
Wait, seriously? But we're always told that CO2 is what's causing global warming.
Right, but the sources point out that CO2 is a natural gas. It's what plants need to survive for photosynthesis. In fact, farmers actually pump CO2 into greenhouses to make their crops grow faster.
So it's not inherently a bad thing.
That's what the sources argue. They also highlight the role of the sun in climate change.
The sun, of course, the sun affects the climate.
Right, but the sources claim that the sun's influence is often downplayed in climate models. They point to NASA data that shows a clear correlation between solar activity and global temperatures. Like when the sun's activity is low, the Earth tends to cool down, and when the sun's activity is high, the Earth tends to warm up.
Interesting. So maybe the sun plays a bigger role than we're being told.
Exactly. And they also bring up volcanoes.
Volcanoes, what do they have to do with climate change?
Well, the sources point out that when a big volcano erupts, it releases a ton of CO2 and other gases into the atmosphere, like way more than all the cars in the world combined.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So the sources ask, if volcanoes can have such a huge impact on the climate, why is all the focus on human emissions?
It makes you wonder if we're getting the whole story.
Right. And if these alternative perspectives are true, if CO2 isn't really the enemy, if the sun and volcanoes play a much bigger role than we're being told, then why aren't we hearing more about this?
That's a great question. And that's where the idea of a cover-up comes in.
Right, exactly. The sources suggest that there's a deliberate effort to suppress information that challenges the mainstream climate narrative. They point to things like censorship on social media.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that. People getting banned or shadow banned for posting stuff that questions climate change.
Right. The sources claim that YouTube, Twitter X, Facebook, they're all doing it. They've even banned entire channels and accounts of scientists who disagree with the official narrative.
It's like they're trying to control what we see and hear.
That's the idea. And it's not just social media. They also point to how the mainstream media covers climate change.
Yeah, it does seem like all the news outlets use the same language, the same talking points.
Right. They always use words like unprecedented, climate emergency, point of no return. The sources ask, is this just a coincidence? Or is there a coordinated messaging strategy going on?
It's almost like they're all reading from the same script.
Exactly. And finally, the sources analyze the climate change narrative through the lens of psychological operations, or PSYOP.
PSYOP, like mind control.
It's about using propaganda and psychological techniques to influence people's beliefs and behaviors.
Okay, I'm listening.
So they identify these classic PSYOP markers that they say are present in the way climate change is communicated.
Like what?
Things like appealing to fear, repeating slogans over and over, demonizing people who disagree, and creating a sense of urgency.
Yeah, I can see that. They definitely play on people's fears a lot.
Right. And the sources suggest that this is all part of a deliberate strategy to manipulate public opinion and make people more accepting of certain solutions, even if those solutions involve giving up some of their freedoms.
So it's a massive psyop designed to control us through fear.
That's what the sources are suggesting.
Wow, this is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So after all that, where do we even stand? What are we supposed to believe about climate change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, these sources have presented a lot of information to consider. They've shown us some inconsistencies in the mainstream narrative. They've highlighted potential financial incentives. They've raised the possibility of a coordinated cover-up. And they've even suggested that this whole thing could be a psychological operation designed to control us.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide what they believe.
Right, but it's hard to know what to believe when there's so much conflicting information out there.
That's true. And that's why it's so important to be critical, to question everything, and to do your own research. Don't just accept what you're being told by the authorities, whether that's the government, the media, or even scientists.
Question everything. That's good advice.
It's the only way to get to the truth.
Well, this has been a wild ride. Thanks for joining us on Conspiracy Q. Don't forget to rate and follow the show to help spread the truth. We'll see you next time for another top secret investigation.
And remember, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp.
And always question the narrative.
Always.